In the first video of this series, I'm Nobody, Who Are You? We talked about that pervasive sense of nobodiness and just what that type of thing can do to a person. And in just yesterday's video, the previous video in this series, we talked about how loneliness can shape the human soul itself. In fact, there may be no greater determinant of an individual's actions than perhaps the emotion of loneliness. Today's poem kind of marries those two ideas. One thing that you'll notice time and again with Emily Dickinson is that these through lines in her poetry, they know no bounds. If you're willing to look hard enough in each of these poems, you will find at least one thread that leads to any of Emily Dickinson's other poetry. And really, that's what this series is sort of set up to examine, to explore. But This Is My Letter to the World is a poem that really takes an odd sort of twist. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me. So when we really start to look at this poem, there's a couple questions that we have to ask ourselves. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me, the simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me. I'm just going to highlight them here, and we will start our discussion thereby. The first thing, the simple news mentioned. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty. So this could be just a universal truth about nature that is also true in human beings. That is the one that I sort of lean towards when I am reading this poem in that fashion is that, look, the simple truth that nature tells, it tells on a yearly basis, it tells on a daily basis. There is a cycle of things, and just as the sun rises to start the day, it sets to start the night. That night will die at the birth of the next day. Every season ends to start the next season. Every year ends to start that cycle over again. There is a steady impermanence to this state of life, and in the end, there is an impermanence to each of us. So it might be that our speaker here is saying, look, this is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. We'll get back to that. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty, these simple truths that shine through nature, that everything comes to an end. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. These things are true whether we want them to be true or not. They will happen, things like death. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me. Meaning, I came, I saw, maybe I didn't conquer, but look, My time here is up. Because of nature's very essence, because of the fact that nature puts these things on cycle, judge tenderly of me. Don't judge me too harshly, because it was my time and I went. But there is another, perhaps darker, meaning here. The simple news that nature told. This is a statement made right after our speaker says that the world never wrote to me. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. If we're not linking those two statements, the statement between this is a letter because no one ever wrote to me, with the statement, the simple news that nature told with tender majesty, if we're not saying that those two things are linked, why put them back to back? Meaning that perhaps this poem is a little bit darker. Maybe this poem is saying, look, yeah, no one liked me. No one ever liked me. No one ever wanted me around. No one ever wrote to me. And this is my letter to the entire world that never wrote to me. I was okay with that. It is my nature, the simple news that nature told of me was that I was not here for your entertainment. She did refer to publishing as the auction of the mind of man. Maybe she saw just general interactions with other individuals as something like intellectual prostitution. Maybe this poem is our speaker saying, look, this is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. This is just the way I am. You could have written to me. Probably I would not have written back. It is my nature to be alone. Nature forced that on my character. It could be that. Now, once we are accepting that, the number two thing to talk about here, the number two question here, countrymen. What a weird turn. Why is she speaking to Americans here? I'm not so sure that she is. Countrymen does not necessarily have to be a statement about physical borders on a map. Countrymen, you could see this very easily in the same way that if she were to use the phrase kinfolk. Countrymen, kinfolk, these people who share the same thing with me. It could be that she doesn't care about the world writ large. It could be that Emily Dickinson here does not care about quote unquote Americans, or in the way that country used to be meant. Country just meant a little bit of land around you, right? Ernest Hemingway's The Last Good Country is a good example of that. The Last Good Country is not talking about the United States, it's talking about this general area that we live in. Why do you call that a country? Because normally people that live in close proximity to you share some of your values, beliefs, and ideas. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. Emily Dickinson here, if we are to take the latter reading from our earlier point, that what Emily Dickinson is doing here is not speaking to the nature, the simple news that Emily Dickinson is speaking towards is the fact that she is a loner, is a fact that she was going to be alone, is the fact that her character is comprised as it is. If that is the interpretation with which we are journeying through this poem, countrymen might simply mean those other people like me. We have, this is my letter to the world, something sort of ethereal here, right? This is not a letter, this is a poem. Is that what our writer is that what our speaker is referring to when she says letter? Is it this poem, or is there something else? Countrymen might be those types of people like Emily Dickinson. Now, this is my letter to the world. Again, I do not necessarily think that an interpretation for this has to be that the this involved is this poem, because if I say, for example, this is my letter to the world, I could still be talking about the poem and just gesturing with my pen, but I could also be talking about my pen being the letter to the world, right? We have, it is ambiguous, I think, at least ambiguous, that the poem itself is what our speaker is referring to by saying, this is my letter to the world. So, what this says is, our speaker is trying once. Whatever it is that our speaker is saying to the world, she's doing it once. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. I believe the this in question is this poem. Meaning that the entire letter to the world that our speaker is putting out there is just saying, look, don't judge me too harshly. Wow. What a message. The only thing I'm ever going to say to you is just don't think too bad of me. That's a rough one. That is a rough one from our speaker here. The only thing I am ever going to venture out to say to the world is a request that, look, don't go too hard, guys. That's it. Don't go too hard. That's hard. That's rough. That's tough. That is a difficult thing to read, you know? Where you must be. So this poem reminds me a lot in many ways of I'm Nobody. I'm nobody, who are you? Are you nobody too? This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. These questions of nobodiness. Maybe. So one of the series I'm doing on the channel right now is a read through of Carrie by Stephen King. One of the big things in that novel that doesn't get enough credit is this idea of hope. You give a little bit of hope and then you dash it, man. And that can be absolutely devastating to an individual who has already accepted nobodiness, right? If you accept that you are nobody, you get to just put your head down and carry on being nobody. But when someone gives you a little bit of hope, that can be devastating. I'm nobody, who are you? We get a little bit of hope. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. That hope just never comes. It is perhaps not as devastating a poem as I'm Nobody, Who Are You, but it has its own quiet sadness playing underneath. Now, I want to talk about nihilism. I want to talk about nihilism and hauntology in all of these readings. You look at this poem, and it might sound pathetic. I think that is a valid reading of this poem, that it could be considered pathetic. Not the poem itself, but the speaker. The speaker, having accepted their place as nobody, has gone through their entire life, we'll get back to that a little bit later, and said, look, this is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Gosh, just don't judge me too hard. That's a kind of a pathetic thing, right? And I don't mean pathetic as judgmental. I mean pathetic in an appraisal sort of way. There are things that are pathetic in this world. You wish to help them. You don't wish to ridicule them. This is, in my opinion, a poem that could border very easily on that if you're willing to let that interpretation lie there. I'm not sure we should let that interpretation lie there. Our speaker This is my letter to the world. This is my address, okay? That never wrote to me. This is my address because you never came to me with anything. Judge tenderly of me. Okay, if our speaker here is dead, is gone, or has been delivered the news that he or she is going to die, right? This poem in any of those situations is close to being past tense. And again, we're going to get back to this. We'll just say, for the sake of this argument, this poem is close to past tense, which means that our speaker would have gotten through everything, all of her life, never being talked to, never having the letter written to her. And instead of saying, oh, good gosh, good golly, what could I do to get more letters? Our speaker, in nihilistic fashion, kept living their life by their own values, and by the time they got to the end said, yeah, this could be gone, this could be final, I might be done, just don't judge too tenderly of me. Just judge tenderly of me, pardon me. Don't judge me too harshly. I lived by my codes, values, ethics, and beliefs. You don't have to like it. Just don't judge me too harsh. Wow. Wow, that is strong nihilism there, saying I lived my life my way. You don't have to accept it. But I did it. I sure did it. Now, hauntological. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Is our speaker past tense? Is our speaker writing or speaking from beyond the grave? Wrote is past tense. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Never wrote to me. Our speaker is, in hauntological terms, affecting the now from the never after, from the ever after. Our speaker, who has lived their entire life, is now speaking to us from beyond the grave, begging for a difference of opinion. Our speaker is the spectral. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me while I was alive. Now that I'm gone, all that is left is your judgment of me. Just judge tenderly. Our speaker is speaking to us from the past, not existing now, but not existing now. What a wonderful hauntological sort of conundrum. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. The simple news that nature told with tender majesty. Her message is committed to hands I cannot see. For love of her, sweet countrymen, judge tenderly of me.